Blood, Sex and Royalty is a Netflix docudrama out next week, described as a steamy modern take on the British royal drama. The three-part series features monarchs including Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII and was partly filmed at Hever Castle.
Did he actually say he was going to marry you, Anne?
Of course. More or less.
We have brought the people closer to God than they have ever been!
Enough!
One of the historians featured in the drama, Dr. Owen Emmerson, the Kent Castle's assistant curator.
Anne Boleyn, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Blood, Sex and Royalty. It's a really interesting story, Owen, isn't it, of what the whole Boleyn family, but also this wider perspective of the court is. And we kind of sometimes, I guess, as a historian, I wonder what your perspective on this, we kind of sometimes have not always really grasped how brutal this actually was, this period.
It really was. I mean, this is a period sort of soaked in blood, and all of the power struggles at court are defined in usually by bloodshed with an execution, and this is very much the case with the story of the Boleyns. There is bloodshed when they rise to power, and my goodness, there is bloodshed when they fall as well.
Anne's particular story is such an interesting one, and maybe you could first of all, give us that perspective. Yes, the childhood home of Anne Boleyn is what's said, but people almost, I think, have been lost in that sense of a child sitting there in Hever, and that's the end of the story for Hever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is very famous for being the childhood home of Anne Boleyn. That's our strap line when visitors come to visit us. But actually, it was the site of where the most interesting part, I think, of Anne's story played out during what was termed the Great Matter. That's when Henry was struggling to secure an annulment of his first marriage to marry Anne. And Hever acts as her sanctuary almost during this period in the mid to late 1520s. This is where Anne escapes to get away from the heat of court and scandal that is going on as Henry attempts the unthinkable and tries to divorce his first queen. So Hever is really important in this story. This is where Anne Boleyn actually makes that decision to marry Henry. And initially, when Henry started pursuing her, Anne really wasn't particularly interested, and Hever actually acted as the place where Anne tried to escape from his advances. So it plays a really, really important part in this story.
The word treachery as well very much comes from that 16th century period, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah, absolutely. And there were different degrees of treachery, the worst, of course, being high treason, and that was the charge levied not only against Anne, but her brother George too.
You feature in the new Netflix docudrama Blood, Sex and Royalty. And for you, I think that from what I've seen so far, that the sense is all about actually Anne's ideas are really dangerous. It can't be underestimated what she's thinking and how that plays out.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what really drew me to this series. It's a really quite action-packed, high-stakes version of Anne's story, and it puts her at the heart of it. She was a radical thinker. She was almost infected with this radical zeal when she was educated in Europe. And this really was the key to Henry unlocking that impossible task of breaking away from Catherine. Anne showed him an alternative route. She placed what were deemed heretical texts in Henry's hand and showed him that in the Bible there was no mention of the Pope, and that the king was supposed to be next to God. And it's this seed that she places in Henry's head via these radical reformist ideas that leads him to indeed break with Rome. Quite amazing that Anne is at the centre of this radical decision.
In the 16th century, Anne Boleyn navigates treacherous sexual politics and rises to become Queen of England. She forges history as she reshaped King Henry VIII's worldview. But she's expected to give birth to a male heir and makes powerful enemies along the way. The series itself follows in the footsteps of shows in the past like The Tudors. And I wonder whether for you as a historian, that's where it really changed with that original series, where there was a kind of, dare I say it, Dallas-esque approach to looking at the medieval families, which in the past had not really been there. It maybe had been shrouded in a bit of grey.
Yeah, no, definitely so. I think, I often refer to the different depictions of Anne Boleyn as Anne of a Thousand Ways, because, my God, every generation has an Anne Boleyn. And as much as it tells us about that history, about the woman, these incarnations actually tell us a lot about ourselves as well. They are curated for a specific audience, and this series is, very much inspired, I think, by programs like Bridgerton and also Fleabag. There are elements of these very modern takes in this series, which I find makes it very accessible, very endearing. And dare I say it allows us to like Anne Boleyn in a way that other series have been reluctant to do. So I really enjoy being a part of it.
I know you like Anne Boleyn, and what is it about her character? Is it this kind of almost misogynist viewpoint about who she is, that if you stand up for yourself in those times, particularly as a woman, therefore you must be a witch, a harlot, a person who, is going against the grain, because that's the kind of feeling through the history books that I certainly remember at school.
Very much so. I mean, in the early modern period, women were supposed to be subordinate. This is a highly patriarchal society, and Anne really didn't conform to those societal ideals. And this, very much attracted Henry initially. But what made Anne stand out as a mistress, shall we say, soon became tiresome as a wife. But of course, we're in a post-Me Too era, and seeing a powerful woman enacting agency is a really important thing. And also seeing the consequences of that in history, what actually happened to Anne as a consequence of her meddling, as she would have termed it, is a really important message to us today.
And I'm sure many women listening to this right now will also be saying, and not a lot has changed, because as much as the Me Too movement has forged conversation and maybe some people to rethink how they act, it also is still very much there. You only have to travel through social media on a daily basis to see some of it. Dare I say it, images in our own parliament often come to the fore too.
Very much so. I mean, I'm thinking immediately of the study that was recently done about the levels of abuse and harassment that MPs are subjected to on social media. And lo and behold, it's women that overwhelmingly bear the brunt of this. So, yes, it couldn't be a more pertinent message today, I don't think.
Exteriors of Hever Castle have been used for blood, sex and royalty. And I was with you just almost a month ago where we were putting together our Halloween programme, and standing outside with you in the dark where the light was fading and the bats were flying around the top of the towers. It is such an iconic building. You couldn't have done a programme fundamentally based around Hever Castle without showing that.
No, absolutely. And you'd be surprised. There have been a number of productions that have faked Hever. They haven't actually included those beautiful exterior walls in the production. So I was really rather thrilled that they went to the lengths of coming to Hever and filming those exterior shots, because it just makes all the difference, I think. It's such a beautiful and important part of the Boleyn story.
Oh, and as an on-screen historian, having this role, being part of a show that is drama but also documentary. I'm always interested to know, and we see, what is known as talking heads in the business, people who are giving their perspective and a historical perspective that you would give. You're also a person who at Hever Castle, is a custodian, shows people around, gives a real sense of the place coming alive. So how do these kind of dramas work for you? Because sometimes, we'll see what happens after this show goes out on the 23rd, but you might see some critical analysis saying, it's it's not really giving a real in-depth point of view. It's kind of frivolous, it's fun, it's, not meant to be anything else. How do you see it, and how does it sit with you as a historian, the different versions of events?
I think there can be quite a lot of snobbery around these kind of programmes. Actually, I got into history via popular culture. My gateway drug, shall we say, was Anne of the Thousand Days, that wonderful, groundbreaking 1969 film that again was shot here at Hever. That was really radical for its time. How much history in there is accurate? Very little. But actually, I think these are springboards. They encourage people to go and do their own research and see different ideas and different incarnations. That's particularly true, I think, of Anne Boleyn. There are so many different versions of her. This one will really resonate with a lot of people. It won't for others. They will think of those classic, portrayals by Dame Dorothy Tootin and think, no, that was my Anne. And actually, I think this is really important because it tells us about how Anne Boleyn has changed over history, but it also tells us a lot about ourselves and how we relate to this woman. So the more the merrier in my mind.
And what an icon she remains. So many people gravitate towards the character of Anne Boleyn, that she does, as you say, stand for something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she's powerful, she's determined, she's not always likeable, and that's a really attractive feature in someone when you're not always on their side and, they disappoint you at times and they frustrate you. She's a very rounded character, but there's not enough of Anne Boleyn in the historical record to truly know her. And I think that's why we keep coming back to her, because just as you think you've got a grip on her, she mercurially just slips away and leaving us wanting more. So I hope this gives people something of a fix.
Dr. Owen Emmerson at Hever Castle. Blood, Sex and Royalty drops on Netflix November 23rd.